Hello and welcome back to the Future in Review podcast. I'm Barrett Anderson, the COO of Future in Review. And for those of you who have never heard of Future in Review before, we run the annual FIRE conference, which The Economist has called the best technology conference in the world. Now, the other arm of our business, Strategic News Service, provides its subscribers with the most accurate source of information about the future of technology and the global economy. So if you enjoy these podcast updates, we hope that you will sign up for a free trial of the Strategic News Service Global Report using the link in the description below this podcast. So today I am going to be talking to Mark Anderson, our CEO, about Elon Musk and Twitter, and specifically what we know about Elon based on the 6 or 7 times, I think, that he has been to FIRE and spoken at FIRE, and the way that he thinks about running his businesses and how that might apply to his management and strategy at Twitter moving forward. So, Mark, you first met Elon. Tell us about when you first met Elon. What was the context there?
I met Elon, 2 or 3 different paths we're crossing. One was his brother, Kimball, I believe, was originally a subscriber to SNS, our newsletter. I believe Kimball introduced Elon to SNS. And then separately from that, I was an advisory board member to More Davidow Ventures, and Nancy Schoendorf is a pretty famous venture capitalist, I believe, suggested to Elon separately that he would want to talk to me about starting up SpaceX. So then I'd been in touch with him by email through his brother, but not in person. And so when Nancy suggested he come up here, he suddenly sent me a note saying, "Can I fly up and see you?" And I said, "Yeah, of course." So he did. He flew up to this island where I live, and we talked about SpaceX. So that's the first time I ever met him personally.
And when you first met him, like, what struck you about him then? What did you take away from him? Who did you think that he was as a person after your first conversation?
The impression I had then hasn't changed really since that time. So he was already quite well known for PayPal and there are other names for the prior companies he had in that arena. Zip2, going all the way back to newspaper insertions and stuff. So I knew a lot about his background, but when he came up, I was struck by the same thing I would answer today, and that was he had carefully figured out, I would say from an engineering perspective, how to benefit humanity. And he knew what he had to do. Turned out he was right, I think. And he wasn't quite sure about the timing of it. And so as an example, there's Tesla, there's the electric car idea, mm-hmm. which some people forget that the point wasn't to make money. The point was to drive existing car makers into that market. And they would never have gone, I don't think, if Tesla hadn't gone. So that was one idea, was force the world's car makers to make electric cars. That was important to him to save the planet. Okay. And then the next piece was solar energy. So where's the energy going to come from? Obviously, solar. We have a nuclear power plant. It's called the sun. So, mm-hmm. But he was very worried at that time, and I think properly so, that the technology wasn't there yet. He pictured extremely large, when you're thinking like Elon does, large is really big.
Yeah.
Extremely large farms of solar panels, extremely large panels. And I think that he didn't feel that at that time, the tech, maybe partly I don't think the Chinese had destroyed the market yet, but he might have seen that coming. But anyway, the technology wasn't ripe for doing that yet. And so kind of put that on the back burner, and that left making humanity an interplanetary species. So he really wanted to start SpaceX. And I think the main point of his visit then was to talk about that and figure out if the timing was okay for that. So we talked about that. And so I was left with the feeling that here was a guy who was very smart. He knew what had to be done. None of this stuff was about money. It was only about the big, planetary level strategic steps that had to be taken to save humanity.
And how do you think that that lens, that big planetary level step to save humanity, does or does not apply to, or may not apply to Elon's acquisition of Twitter?
I don't know the answer to that, but if you look at, he takes a lot of arrows because he's famous. He takes a lot of arrows because he's made a lot of money. He's made some pretty good jokes in public about you couldn't try anything that would be less likely to make money than what he did. Starting your own car company to compete, or taking over Tesla to compete with General Motors, guaranteed fail. Starting your own energy company, for solar, that's not going to work. And then starting your own, compete with Boeing and Lockheed, forget it. And not in NASA, no. So although he jokes about it, he's right. No sane person would have done that if they were driven by money. And I think the fact that he's become, if he is now this week, the wealthiest person on the planet, is because of the size and scale of his vision, not because he wanted to get rich. So people kind of miss that. And I would look at any acquisition, whether it's like Twitter, or normally he doesn't acquire, he builds, but any company that he's created from the same lens. So really, when we were, before we get to Twitter, I'd like to kind of do an intervening step. Mm-hmm. I like Elon. I think he's a great guy. He has expressed his own dream as I think he said, I'd like to be the best engineer on the planet. He is. He is. So I believe that's the lens he uses. It's the strategy of saving humanity, and from an engineer's view, how do you do that? What can you build? But if you imagine his life, now I don't know all the ins and outs of his life at all. But I remember a time, and this has been publicized, so I'm not speaking out of school here, but when he was at Fire one year, and again, this has been made public, so it's all right. But I was thinking, gee, this guy's riding high. He's got Tesla going, SpaceX is up and running now, kind of, and wow, got a lot of money. And I saw him behind the stage before he went up to do an interview one of those years at Fire, and I said, how's it going? And he goes, horrible year. I said, what are you talking about? He says, well, just got divorced. I got a bunch of kids I'm trying to raise while I'm doing all this. I'm paying Tesla payroll out of my own checkbook. I'm down to my last, whatever, few million or something. But that was a big dive for him. He was running out of money.
Yeah.
I don't know how I'm going to ever, my rocket blew up again. I don't know how I'm going to pay for all that. If we keep going to SpaceX, it's, pretty tough. Who knew? Time magazine sure didn't know. I mean, the people outside didn't know. So when I look at his life, I probably have a little more empathy. And I try to imagine if all you did was run Tesla, right? That's all. Mm-hmm. Hard work. You're going to beat China and you're going to beat GM. Good luck. How hard could that be? And then, in Germany too, and then while you're at it, Solar City, and you get a lot of arrows for doing what he did with that. And then buy, SpaceX. If he'd stopped there, I don't understand where the hours come from. He has great managers, no question about it. I mean, SpaceX is run by a great woman, but he's still running these things and he's still making technical decisions, I think. So you may remember in one of the interviews I did with him at Fire, we had him, which we've never done before. We broke our time limit. We're very religious about that generally. And we went for, I think, an hour and a half. And right at the end, I said, look, here's my question. You're a CTO of SpaceX and you're CEO. And two guys who spent their whole lives as engineers in aerospace come to you and they're in an argument over a valve, right? And, one guy says, it's this valve. The other guy says, no, it's this valve. And you have to decide. How do you decide that? Why would you know? Dead air. No response. Refused to answer my question. It's the only time he ever did that. And finally, it got embarrassing because there's too much dead air. And I said, okay, I'll answer. That's how smart you are. And that's why he didn't answer, because that's the real answer. And so, we've got a guy in Elon who has the right motivation, in my opinion. He's got the right level of intelligence, in my opinion. And he's willing to take all kinds of arrows and all kinds of crap to get the thing done. And pretty much doesn't take any crap, he just does the work. So he's always in controversy for something he said yesterday. And almost always, I'm just out of politics here because I don't like to do that, but almost always, whatever he says is either true or intended to be true. So I don't see him messing around, even in politics, with things that he doesn't feel just like, well, here's the simple answer from an engineer's perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Stop fighting, whatever it is. So, now I think with that, maybe under our belts in this conversation, we can jump forward and talk about a little bit about Twitter. I don't think he purchased Twitter because he wants to be more famous. I don't think he bought it for the money. Just the opposite, probably take a loss for a while. And then he'll probably make money, which he usually does. But my guess would be that he was deeply offended by something that he thought would affect humanity. So if he believes that free speech is important for humanity, then that would have been his motivation. And he certainly has said it often enough. I tend to take him at face value with things. So my guess is he's telling the truth, and that he really has a personal motivation about free speech being critically important for humanity to go forward. Hard to argue with that idea. It's embarrassing the number of hate speech people who are on there every day, including today, but they're on everything. They're everywhere. So I don't think he bought it to be a policeman. I think he bought it to preserve free speech.
One of the critiques that I've seen generally of there's this tendency to say, all right, if you're not going to, there's a whole debate that we could get into over platforms and whether platforms should guarantee free speech.
Yes.
They're a private entity, so technically there's not actually there's no actual legal requirement to allow everyone to be on there regardless of how much hate they're spewing. However, a good friend of mine, Monica Guzman, who's very smart and has spent a lot of time on political polarity, said at an event that I organized recently, I think there's a problem with forcing people who feel and experience a lot of hate off of a platform, because what happens is they just go somewhere else. They don't go away. It's just that becomes less visible as an element of society. Mm-hmm. And it also,
sure, Trump did that. He went to somewhere else.
Not that it's been successful, but yeah, and I think that it also reinforces those positions, right? So it reinforces that feeling among a specific part of society that they are being censored. It kind of reinforces that sense of insularity. It makes things feel, it kind of, in some ways actually legitimizes their concern.
Yep.
And could be argued to create more polarity throughout society. And it strikes me that, I don't love everything that Elon says, but it does strike me that I think he's made some rather stupid comments that
unlike the rest of us
are not representative of what you would want to have the CEO of a major social platform say. However, I do think that to your point about what is his ultimate motivation, that would be an interesting, that would make sense. And as far as we look a lot at patterns, right? What are the patterns of his previous companies? That motivation would actually make sense to me as his real motivation for acquiring Twitter. Right. And I'll add one other piece of important context, which is Elon has, so I studied information warfare for several years. We did a lot of research into what was ongoing on platforms, specifically Twitter. Throughout all of, sorry, my camera's doing some funny things here, but throughout all of that research, one of the things, we looked at information warfare campaigns all across Twitter. One of the things that kept coming up was that Elon Musk, Tesla, and specifically Elon, but Elon and Tesla were the product of, even when we were searching for other things, they were always one of the top kind of targets of information warfare, which I found really interesting. So there was a lot of ongoing attacks and critiques of Elon that were instigated by fake accounts, right?
Yes. Yeah. Well, one of the games you play on social networks, if you're Russia or whatever, is that you go for the most popular person in the world in terms of followers, and you bring those, some fraction of those people, back to your other websites.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
But also it's a like a little bit of a, you know, ecosystem for what happens is that things start trending, you cause something to start trending, and then the US media picks it up, right? Because that's
Right.
kind of,
They're
and
watching.
then that's a very, actually, it's a really effective mechanism for amplifying whatever the message is that you want to get out there.
That's right. Same thing. So
And
anyhow,
so,
I think we're probably agreeing here. So, imagine that you have that motivation that's relatively pure, and then you buy anything, New York Times, or, well, not a newspaper, because they actually have editors, but you buy, any website that's just, double dishing, Google, or whatever, it's just double dishing stuff out, and it's trying to be a carrier without having any responsibility. No matter what you bought, you're going to be in trouble.
mm-hmm.
He's made a few jokes about, like, this will be hell. I'm not looking forward to this.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see. He's in the middle right now of rearranging the chairs, on the deck of the cruise line. So it'll be interesting to see whether, what kind of changes he really does make. Everyone tries to, promote. I think they project their own feelings onto him a lot. My guess is he'll probably surprise people a bit and be much more sane than they had been saying that he'll be. We'll see. But I wouldn't want to have that job at all. But I don't think he wants it, of being the dictator of Twitter, the chief twit, where you need to then make decisions on these issues of hate speech. What is hate speech? Whose is it? How far can it go before it's hate speech? Whose is okay? Whose is not okay? What do you do? Do you throw them out, or all that stuff? On a minute by minute basis worldwide. I just would hate that job. So
I don't think Evan Williams particularly liked it.
I don't think anyone liked it. I don't think Jack Dorsey liked it.
Yeah.
I think Jack loves Elon, right? I don't know, who knows. But so, it's not a good job. It's not an obvious, there's no obvious win there. There's an obvious need, but not an obvious win. It's a tough job.
One of the things that he announced immediately was that he was going to have people start charging for the blue check mark, right? And that's been, off criticized because people are like, well, what about, people in, government dissidents in foreign countries? What about people who can't afford the blue check mark, but they're important people? And it's an interesting question because, I think it represents a very pragmatic approach to, like, how do you make this company work, right? Twitter for a very long time has not been working as a business, and that's been its biggest struggle. But it also highlights this interesting kind of tension, which is Twitter's value is in information sharing, right? I think a lot of people use it because you get
personal value, it's social value, but not its revenue value.
Exactly.
So I think he's trying to escape the trap that Facebook and everybody else is in, which is when you let advertising drive your revenue model, then you're owned by them.
Yeah.
And they are not reliable if you care about free speech. So it's a trap. And when he said that thing, which he did about, like, power to the people, he said, and people were mocking him for saying that because he wanted to charge them. But guess what? By asking people who are the users to pay, he's actually trying to give the power back to them instead of to General Motors or to somebody else. And so if he succeeds in that, even though they'll be kicking and screaming, maybe they will have the power. And that would be a success for him, I think, and them. it'll change things, but it's not saying if you don't pay, you don't get on.
Right.
It's just saying
There's a difference. Yeah.
yeah, you still can come on, but if you want to have a blue check mark, it's going to be, turns out $8 is what the number is today, but we'll see. So, he really is literally is trying to give the power of the purse to the people who he'd rather have it.
So in the context of looking forward, based on what Elon has done with SpaceX and Tesla, any predictions about what we can expect from his Twitter strategy?
Well, step one is already happening. So he's going to lay a lot of people off. When you listen to I've seen him interviewed by, I think it was the head of the Air Force, on who do you hire? How do you measure performance? How do you incent people? What are you looking for? He's been very controversial in requiring people to actually go to work. Shock, the manufacturer. So I think he's pretty much taken no prisoners on the issue of who should work there and what should they be doing. So it's not a surprise to me, or won't be a surprise to me, if many people are laid off or leave because they feel like they're going to be laid off. And then once that is done with, mostly, you'll have a different type of person working there probably than you have today. Not for everybody, but maybe for a third of the people there, and or half even. So he'll be looking for people who are very high performance, very smart, work hard, show up for work, don't give any crap about whatever, do the job. And that's kind of an manager's view of how things should be run. He'll be bringing that to a media company.
Yeah.
That'll be interesting. It won't be like working at the New York Times or the Washington Post, but it will be, I think, extremely effective. So from a revenue perspective, you'll probably have half or 2/3 of the bodies in the building creating more than was created before, be my guess. And it'll be more efficient. It'll probably be more focused. Now on what? So they're gonna have to come to agreement about what he agrees to. He owns it now. It's going to be private, not public. And so, what does Elon see? Does he see, is free speech the top thing? And then if that is the top thing, is there any way to break through that for moderation? He says he's going to have a moderation group of some kind, but it'll be pretty Catholic, I think. It'll be pretty straightforward. Here are the rules. As few gray areas as possible, and then just get on with it. It's an engineering problem. I believe that's how he'll run it.
It strikes me that, so I have had friends who worked, for Twitter, inside of Twitter. And one of the things that was super interesting to hear from them was how intensely complicated and collaborative almost, but in a way that slowed things down, their culture was. Right. So you had to get a buy-in from all of these different people in different departments and organizations, which made it really hard, I think, to try anything new.
Yeah.
It was very, very closely controlled. And what that has meant is that for the last 10 years, we've seen very few innovations at Twitter, right? Like,
yeah,
pretty much no change to the format, pretty much no change to any of that stuff. And so I think one thing that we can definitely expect moving forward, knowing what we know about Elon, is that system is going away, right? That culture is going away.
So,
and in its place will be this, try something new. Maybe it breaks things, but you do it anyways. And then you move to the next thing, you try the new thing, and then move to the next thing. I mean, that's what he's famous for doing with Tesla, especially, and with SpaceX, right?
And for listening to customers.
Things.
Yeah, build things. Don't be afraid to try things, and find out what people are objecting to and fix it. Did a lot of that with Tesla, and then and then find out what they want. So whether it was range anxiety or being a problem for whatever the problem is, find it out and fix it.
Mm-hmm.
It's very good at that.
Yeah.
There's one more thing here that we haven't mentioned, and it may be the root cause of all this stuff, which is the pricing based on bots. And I don't think he was playing games. All the Wall Street guys went always playing games to get a
No,
better.
no. Twitter has for a very long time had a huge problem with bots and internal numbers, and it's been a kind of like a secret, underground, not so secret thing. I think that was absolutely right on. I think he went through the acquisition process and learned, oh, the actual number of users is much lower than they're
Yes.
saying.
Yeah, yeah, and they didn't want to admit it.
Yeah.
You get into a lot of trouble with your advertisers when they find out that they're paying for bots instead of for people.
Yep.
Bots don't buy shoes, so it's a problem. And I think it's a problem for all social networks, but Twitter's, there you are. And years ago, I told the economy, I was on stage, that I figure it's probably between 25 and 40%. And they were like, what? It's like, yeah. So, if this came out to be between 25 and 40%, I go, yeah, that would make sense.
Yep.
That may force then all the other social networks to get real, because their shareholders and their advertisers will be saying, wait a minute, Facebook or Instagram or whatever, what the heck here? What are we paying for? So I think that'll happen. Yeah,
Well, it's interesting. It's one of the other people that we had on stage at Fire was Michael Dell, as he was taking his company from public to private, right back to private. And the fact that this is now a private company, actually, I think makes it much more interesting, because it removes a lot of the pressures of the public market that cause those companies to do things like inflate their user numbers or not. And so it actually gives him a lot more leeway to take a step back, figure out what's not working, and get real about how to fix it than that company has previously had.
That's right. And it's kind of fun. So here are our Fire friends, Michael, Elon. Apparently Elon called Michael up to ask that very question not long ago. It's like, take this private. What did you go through? Is it worth it? All that kind of stuff. So I'm sure you got good advice from Michael. And maybe we could have them both back at Fire next year. Yeah, that'd be fun
to talk about that process. That would be very interesting conversation.
Have a little panel.
Yeah.
So anyhow, he did call him, and I think that's, he got good advice from Michael. What was reported was that Michael said something like, yeah, it's hard, but it's worth it.
Mm-hmm. That's kind of what he was saying to us.
It was what he's saying
back then.
Yeah, he even said a little more. We got to talk to him about because of his business, right? Mm-hmm. We were talking about Lenovo and China and ripping off IP and subsidizing products, and I asked Michael about how you compete with a company that is state supported and is showing 3% operating margins when you have to show at least 6 to 8% for Wall Street to give you any room. He said, "Yep, that's one of the reasons we went private."
Yep,
I did. Yeah. Well, I think we've covered it, and
I do too. Thank you.
I hope that Elon has success with Twitter. I think he will. And maybe people ought to just calm down, be quiet for a couple of days, let him figure it out, and then judge him once.
Give him a week or two to wrap his head around it.
That's it. Well, it shouldn't take that long.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time, Mark. We are also having, I should mention, our monthly SNS member happy hour is Thursday at 4 p.m. Pacific time. If you are not already a member, you should join, and you will get an invite to that happy hour. We'll be talking more about this specific topic, and it's off the record, so it'll be even more interesting. Hope to see you all there.
Thanks, Barrett.